Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. It is our first show of April, and we appreciate you spending a little bit of your day with us. Beginning today's broadcast, the USDA believes farmers will plant 91.1 million acres of corn and 87.6 million acres of soybeans. That's according to its prospective plantings report released Wednesday morning. USDA's grain stocks report was released Wednesday morning too. It tallied corn stocks to be the lowest in 7 years at 7.7 billion bushels, and soybean stocks the lowest in 5 years at 1.5 billion bushels. We spoke with Heartland Farm Partners President Jeff Peterson this week to run through the numbers.
Yeah, exactly. It was great to see, as we dig into those numbers and look at those acres, big surprise on the acres today. And we were wondering, what we were kind of thinking though, is that we were thinking we wouldn't quite get enough bean acres, but we thought if we didn't get enough beans, we'd surely get probably more than enough corn. But it turns out, we came in a couple million acres below what was needed on or expected on the corn side, about 2.4 million below what was expected on the soybean side. Soybean number was up 4.5 million acres, but kind of another surprise in there was wheat. Wheat snuck in there about 1.3 million acres higher than what was expected. 2 million more wheat acres, which that's actually a surprise for me too, Troy.
Okay, and that soybean number of 87.6 million acres, I think that's going to be a number that maybe we'll have an eye on over the coming months, yeah?
Oh, we sure will. That 87.6 million acres. We need more acres than that. Really, in order to kind of keep our stocks together, we probably need at least 7.5, maybe 8 million acres just to keep our ending stocks, steady going into next year. So that the market will be watching that one very, very close. They'll be paying a lot of attention also about the amount of double crop beans that happen behind some of these wheat acres. So we'll have to continue to watch that going forward.
Are we seeing a shift in acres when it comes to any particular states?
Yeah, I think we have to. We have to take a look up in the Dakotas. The Dakotas, South Dakota, North Dakota, parts of Minnesota. Those areas had such high amounts of prevent plant last year. And so now we're going to have to see as they actually get a chance to get in there and get some of those acres planted, we're going to have to watch the acres, overall numbers. We're also going to have to watch the mix in there and see which amount of those acres go to corn and beans. And if they get off an early start, which it sure looks like they could up in North Dakota, a few more acres may end up sliding into that spring wheat. So we're going to have to watch those closely. The other areas we've got a close eye on. If we take a look across Illinois, Indiana, into a little bit of Ohio, even looking back into Kansas on some of those double crop acres, as we dug in and looked at the corn and soybean total acres between those states, we just don't think there's enough double crop soybean acres showing up in those areas where they can do it. So those are going to be some of the things we're going to have to watch closely.
And moving on to quarterly grain stocks, close to estimates for both corn and soybeans, right?
Yeah, they were really close. The thing I think we have to look at is that at 7.7 billion bushels on the corn side, as we look at that, that's down 251 million bushels from last year. So even though it was about as expected, it's still down. But over on the bean side, that 1.56 billion, that's down 690 million bushels from where we would have been last year. That's down over 30%. But what gets interesting though, Troy, is we dig deeper and take a look at the state numbers for Nebraska. Nebraska's soybean stocks numbers are down about 80 million bushels. That's down over 40% compared to a year ago.
So when you look at those numbers for corn and soybeans, what does that indicate to you about demand?
Yeah, so what it does, it reinforces the fact of the demand that we've been talking about. It's real, it's here. It also gives us a good feel for basis going forward. We look at the local basis levels for the ethanol plants and the soybean crushing facilities and anybody that's railing out beans, and they're very strong. So that kind of the basis looks to improve, I think, going forward. And it also supports the thought that there is less corn and soybeans out there, not just in the U.S., but also in Nebraska.
Okay, so you take these numbers, you put them in your balance sheet. What does that mean for prices this fall?
Yeah, the big thing and the thing we talked about on the soybean side is that we needed that 7 to 7.5, almost 8 million acres to kind of keep our stock steady. If we throw the 87.6 million acres into the soybean side, it gives us an ending stock number of about 36 million bushels, which honestly, that's way too tight. So what it tells us is that here in the short term, soybeans are going to have to work their way higher, both on the basis side and on the future side, to pull some additional acres into production, or to get those people that will physically go ahead and plant wheat to plant some double crop beans behind it on the bean side. Corn side also, we got to keep in mind that with the acres we got, we're okay, unless we have a problem with that safrinha corn crop coming out of Brazil. And so we're going to have to watch that South American weather really close.
All right, lots of great info today. We probably won't talk to you again until we get into growing season. So do you have any marketing or risk management advice for us until we get to then?
Yeah, I sure do. This market is going to give us a good opportunity to get some good prices sold on this remaining old crop. Make sure we're sharpening our pencils on our new crop and getting our finger on the trigger to make some sales on that. For anything that we're selling, I'd say old crop or new crop in here, keep in mind we do think the basis levels will improve as we go forward.
Next week, we'll be joined by Darren Fessler of Lakefront Futures and Options. Next up, there are a number of concerns on the minds of crop producers as planting season ramps up. From hybrid placement to planting rates and depth, producers are working to make sure they're ready to go as soon as conditions are most optimal. Market Journal's Bill Dodd spoke with Mike Hinrichs, owner and operator of Hinrichs Seed Company in Shickley, Nebraska, to learn what producers should be focusing on over the next few weeks.
It's time again to break out the planter and get back into the fields, but before you put your first seeds in the ground, there's a considerable amount of work yet to be done. The biggest concern, however, is the calendar date which producers will be able to get back into the field. While that projected date is fast approaching for many in Nebraska, you'll still want to make certain that you don't start too early.
It looks like April 9th is a Friday, so I would assume we'll probably see some guys test. If soil conditions are right and temperature's right, I would think we'd have some guys go probably Friday, test the waters. And then I think you'll look at that Monday, the 12th. There'll be a lot of seed. If conditions are right, there'll be a lot of seed put in that week for this area. So temperature on corn germinates at 50. We like to see, even if you're in the 40s, it's nice to look at the forecast and make sure that we're getting a nice general warming trend. Up to 50, you don't want to see something where your soil temp's at 40, 45, and you look towards the future forecast and it's saying that ground or air temperature is going to be in the 20s. Might want to hold things back a little bit. Beans germination temperature is at 60 degrees. So again, we want to make sure we have a nice warming trend going forward, so nothing gets rotted out or sits too long. We want a nice even emergence to optimize yield. Going too early when it's wet out is compaction. It all has to do with compaction at that point. When you do go too early, too wet, and you say you don't mess with your down pressure like you should, you can get hatchet roots, which basically the roots are just going to follow right where your planting went. So that can develop a lot of problems later on.
From pest control to disease suppression, hybrids can help with a number of problems that may be pestering your operation. When you're preparing to plant your hybrids in the coming weeks, there are a number of relevant factors to take into consideration. One thing that is highly recommended is to get in contact with your local seed dealer and agronomist to ensure your planned hybrid placement meets your needs and ensures the most productive performance from your seed.
Some of the things that we're doing right now for guys is we're going through hybrid placements. Some of the main things we look at is insect protection. Are we doing above and below ground insecticide? Are we matching them up on the right fields? Making sure that the above and below ground are going corn on corn, the above ground sticking with old bean ground for guys' rotations. That's one of our main concerns. Another thing we look at is where we're going at with disease as far as our hybrids. If somebody has a specific area, say with Goss's wilt pressure, we want to make sure that we're putting the right hybrid in that Goss's area to help prevent any loss there. And then probably the main thing we're looking at is just hybrid placement by field. Not all plot winners are made to go on every single field. Not everybody has 250 bushel corn, so we need to kind of sort that out. If somebody has a low organic hillsides, we need to make sure that it's not necessarily a plot winner, but maybe a hybrid that handles those tough environments really well. So we go through, find our durability hybrids, we find our high yielding hybrids, and then we sit down with the grower and make sure we place them. So that's probably one thing somebody needs to get together, either with their agronomist or their seed dealer, and make sure they're putting the right hybrid on the right field before planting season.
Finally, before you fire up the planter and get into your fields, there are several things you'll want to have finalized with your planter and other systems around the farm to ensure a smooth planting process and easier upkeep throughout the growing season. The first of those things to get in place will be to make sure that your seeding rate and depth are set to the specifications of your seed and all the bugs are worked out.
Planting depth and seeding rate obviously varies a lot by hybrid, especially with the planting rates. Again, talk to your local seed dealer or your agronomist. Some hybrids that have a flex, we don't need to plant at 30, 32,000. The ones that do not flex very good, we probably need to bump that up to 33, 34,000 if you're underneath irrigation. Planting depth is extremely important. If we plant too shallow, we can develop rootless corn syndrome, and also we can start messing up with our crown roots a little bit. If your planting depth gets too deep, right, then you'll have trouble with emergence, and your mesocado might get a little too long, and again, start messing up with your crown roots a little bit. So planting depth and consistent planting depth throughout the field is extremely important. And I'm back on, getting things ready. Planting monitors are probably a big thing that gets overlooked. Everybody needs to probably get in their tractor, fire up their monitor, get refamiliarized with how the monitor works, what buttons to push. Make sure you talk to your guy and get your planting prescriptions in, get them into the monitor, pull them up, make sure they're what you want. Look at the maps that your agronomist or seed dealer made for you. Make sure that's what you want, and refamiliarize yourself for that, because that's going to take a lot of time that first day to get that monitor right. Big thing I would encourage guys to do is, if you have a date set in your head, if it is the 12th of April, make sure you're going out 2 or 3 days ahead of time, and make sure your fertilizer pumps are going to work. Make sure your seed's calibrated right, your starter pump is calibrated right, and mess with that monitor a little bit. Refamiliarize yourself with that, because that does take a while, and guys will get frustrated and say the heck with it, and they'll just go. So if you have a date picked on your head, make sure you go 2 or 3 days ahead of time and make sure things are going to work.
Having a good rapport with your agronomist and seed dealer will be essential in getting your equipment up to snuff for the upcoming growing season. If you can get a good plan on your hybrid placement and make sure your equipment is tuned up, you should be well on your way to a successful planting season. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks for that, Bill. Great information. Mike also says with hybrids, it's a good idea to plant newer hybrids frequently to prevent resistance development. It's also recommended to balance hybrid benefits with their price tag to ensure you're making a profitable decision. Next up, a new transportation bill could cause problems for the ag industry if exemptions aren't made. Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh spoke with Nebraska Extension Policy Specialist Brad Lubben to learn more about the bill and the reintroduction of the Schulz Act.
Recently, the Haulers of Agriculture and Livestock Safety Act of 2021, or the Schulz Act for short, was reintroduced to Congress by Nebraska Senator Deb Fischer. The act aims to change the current hours of service regulations to better serve the agriculture industry.
The primary push here is how to try and strike a balance between transportation safety, which is what the rewrite of federal regulations have been focused on, and the issue of animal welfare, which is unique to agriculture and other related haulers. How do you balance animal welfare issues if transportation safety issues effectively shut you down short of your destination?
Some of the regulations required for trucking safety directly interfere with animal welfare. The Schulz Act will expand exemption allowances so drivers don't hit their limits in the middle of the road.
With the push for more stringent enforcement of hours of service and electronic logging devices, those actual devices on the tractor trailer that would literally shut down or idle down that equipment when it reached its time limit. When you have potential wait times to load at a animal production facility, and then you have the time it takes to get down the road and to get to the new location, we saw some transportation guidelines that said, well, we would add a 150-mile radius to the point of origin, and that would effectively allow you to, if necessary, load at more than 1 or 2 spots before you really got on the road. But the Schulz Act, as reintroduced here, would bring that same sort of margin of of safety or margin of waiver to the destination. So that if you're within 150 miles of your destination, then the rules, the limits don't apply and you're still able to go get to that destination. Ultimately, it means that the sort of the radius of agricultural transportation that can get live animals to Nebraska, or frankly to any other feedlot in the Great Plains, that radius gets just a little bit bigger. That means it's a little more likely, a little more manageable for single trucker hauls, single shot or single straight through deliveries to get here as scheduled on time.
In addition, Brad says the Act expands the general ag exemptions and will create more flexibility and manageability for agriculture year-round without compromising safety. As of March 31st, 2021, the bill does not yet have a formal number, and Brad says it may have a tough road ahead.
It faces, the typical uncertain fate of moving through a divided, difficult Congress that making progress on anything is rather complicated. So it's an appropriate policy direction. Its intentions are clear. Its fate we'll have to watch and see.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
Thanks, Maddie. We'll be keeping an eye on this bill as it progresses through Congress in the coming weeks, and we will keep you updated on any major changes. Moving on, Cody Stricker from Alliance was one of the 2020 National Wheat Foundation State Yield Contest winners for his irrigated winter wheat. Stricker says wheat has been a good rotation crop for him over the years, with the wheat stubble after harvest curbing wind erosion, holding soil moisture, and keeping weed pressure down. He usually plants sugar beets or corn into the stubble the following season. You can learn more about Stricker's wheat growing strategies in the March Nebraska Farmer. And taking a look at the hog markets now, USDA's quarterly hogs and pigs report tallied nearly 75 million head on March 1st. That's down 2% from a year ago and down 3% from last quarter's report. Nebraska's inventory was down 3% from a year ago to 3.6 million head. I spoke with Iowa State Extension Livestock Economist Lee Schulz earlier this week and started by asking his thoughts on the USDA estimates.
So very bullish report. I think it came obviously as a bit of a surprise. I think we've seen some surprises the last couple of quarters. That was very much coronavirus pandemic related. But given where the fundamentals were, I think there was expectations that we would see larger inventories. Certainly that's where the pre-report expectations were at. The fact we came in below year ago levels, we came in below quarter ago levels, and even at lower than most of those pre-report expectation ranges really gave it that bullish tone.
Lee, put that into perspective for us in terms of what that means for producers, because the USDA has shown lots of growth in past pork reports.
Well, I think first it's important to put them in a bit of a context. So this is still the second largest March 1 hog and pigs inventory that we've seen. So I like to think of this as maybe just a little bit of a reprieve in that growth that we've seen. I think it's too premature to say that we're seeing some contraction in the industry. Now, obviously, we've dealt with a lot of tumultuous situation here the last 12 months or so that I think is contributing to where these inventory levels are at.
Yeah, that leads into my next question. Is this mainly due to COVID-19 or is it something else?
Several factors. And I think first, we got to realize that biology dictates these inventories. And so it's roughly pork produced today. Those decisions 10 months ago are dictating that. Well, if I go back 10 months from March 1 of 2021, that's May 1 of 2020. That's arguably really at the height of the pandemic disruptions. And so that certainly contributed to these smaller inventories that we're seeing today. But there's several other, I think, related factors. For example, wage rates have really increased here. They've continued that 4% growth annually. And you could argue in the last year, they've even increased more. Fuel costs, while they've been down, diesel fuel, gasoline, propane costs have been up. It's contributing to some of that increase. And then I think just some of the issues with the pandemic, I think they changed that risk-reward relationship that producers potentially need to increase inventories.
And what about PRRS? Is that a contributing issue?
Well, we've certainly heard a lot of chatter about it. I think that is contributing to the smaller pig crop, for example. So if PRRS typically ramps up October to March, well, if you look at that December, February pig safe per litter, that average was down 5% compared to the prior year. Well, December was down 1.4%, January was down 0.4%, and then you see actually February was up 0.5%. And so I think, yes, we've kind of seen that new strain of PRRS that's been talked about hit, as well as the other strains have contributed to that. But also I think it's very localized, as you've seen in the top 16 producing hog states, you've seen some up, you've seen some down. And so I think, again, that is a bit localized in the impact of PRRS, at least from a year-over-year standpoint.
Lee, any guesses as to how long these tighter supplies could last?
One indication, I think, is looking at the farrowing intention numbers, and at face value is a little bit conservative, but I want to dig in especially to that June-August one. We're comparing to a very large level last year, so anytime you compare to a very large level, that's going to show maybe a larger decline than you would expect at face value. Also, out of the last 10 June-August quarters, only once has the final farrowing number came in below what the first intentions were. So what does that mean? Usually those ramp up as we get closer to that time period. And so that's somewhat what I would expect, and maybe see a little bit larger sow farrowing numbers. But what does it mean? Overall, I think we expect less production than we did coming into the report, as the numbers suggest. Maybe at levels par to a year ago, which is less than what we had expected coming into this year.
Okay, let's look into the Lee Schulz crystal ball and have you give us a price forecast, maybe quarter by quarter for the rest of 2021.
Well, and I'll highlight, it is a broken crystal ball. And so I'm going to forecast the Iowa, Minnesota producer sold, all purchase arrangements, hog price. For the first quarter, we've seen that average about $76 per hundredweight on a carcass basis. For the second quarter, I'm 98 to 102. The third quarter would be 90 to 94, and then the fourth quarter would be 74 to 78. That'd give us an average of about $86 per hundredweight. That's over a 40% increase from last year, and about almost a 30% increase from 2019.
Lee also tells me that after a record-breaking year of pork exports in 2020, numbers look to be pretty good for this year too. And we're going to end things today with weather and Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, we've begun a new month, and I know planting is on the mind of lots of folks. How's the forecast look?
Well, Troy, yes, we are entering the month of April, and we've seen some cooler temperatures off and on during the month, but overall the month of March come out above normal. But the biggest issue we have is that because of the precip we had during March, we've got some very wet conditions in some of the soil surfaces, and it's going to take a little bit longer for the temperatures to work on them and warm it up. The good news is after this week of warmth at the beginning, the cool down, now we're going to start to see a pretty extensive period of warming. In fact, I think it's going to be ample enough to really start to see a real pop in the vegetation across much of the southern half of the state. As we're going to be approaching the 80s to mid 80s across a substantial portion of the southern half of the state as we go into the early part of next week. Then we'll turn our attention to a storm system coming out of the western United States and its potential impacts as we get into the latter half of next week. So if we go to the upper air models, first thing I'll draw your attention to is we've got a well-established ridge. This warming trend that started yesterday after the cool stretch during the midweek period in earnest is going to start building into the region, and we're going to be pretty much under fair skies. A little bit of wind during the afternoon, but overall, you couldn't ask for a better day. We're going to be seeing pretty much 70s across the state. Notice it's precipitation free almost coast to coast, as high pressure system is the dominant force. Now, as we get into tomorrow, we'll start to see a little bit of a wave moving through the southern plains on the periphery of the ridge, But overall, it looks like dry conditions will be firmly in place. We get a little low showing up here on the surface, but those are really the output of some of the differential heating between the mountains and the valleys. Otherwise, precipitation is free. And as we go into Monday, now we start to see the GFS trying to indicate a trough building into the western United States. That's really going to pump up our winds from the south as we go through Monday and Tuesday. That's going to bring us up into the 80s, potentially the mid-80s, depending on if we get more of a southwesterly component. It is showing a little bit of precipitation returns from the GFS model. I think this is kind of overdone. By the time we get to Tuesday, though, starting to see that trough move into the central Rockies, and a surface low is expected to develop in northeastern Colorado. With that, we'll start to see Gulf moisture overrunning the northern plains, and we'll start to see precipitation breaking out across Montana and the Dakotas. By Wednesday, the GFS has a position of this upper air low over east central Nebraska with a low pressure at the surface over northeastern Nebraska. That'll bring wraparound precipitation, and the GFS model is indicating that we could see some widespread moisture over northern Nebraska. That will start to move toward the east during Thursday as that low pressure system starts to open up somewhat and moves over to northern Illinois. That'll put us on the backside and bring some cooler air into us, but that will only be brief. If the GFS model is correct, we'll see the system move out rather rapidly as it overtakes the Great Lakes. See the last of the cold wraparound precipitation hit northeastern Nebraska, and then by Friday we start to see a warming trend of the west as that low pressure sits itself over the Ohio River Valley. So overall, we do have some of these decent shots of precipitation during the middle of the week, and if we look even farther from next Thursday through the following Tuesday, we see that low pressure system sitting over the Ohio River Valley, giving us just barely above normal temperatures. Another trough moves into the west with below normal temperatures, and in terms of precipitation, we're looking at below normal precipitation, and you'll notice this little area of normal precipitation. That is associated with the next system that's expected to move out of the western United States. Now, I will say this. The models have changed dramatically over the last 3 or 4 days in the position of this low ejecting out. So it could be anywhere from the northern plains to the Ohio River Valley. One thing we do know is there's a system coming out. Be prepared. The weather may, at this time of the year, can change rather rapidly. Be prepared for some precipitation somewhere within the central United States.
Thanks, Al. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app, or you can follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. And don't forget, you can get the latest updates on the fight against coronavirus at covid19.unl.edu. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.